Welcome to another Florida Native Plant Society Lunch and Learn. Valerie's been experiencing a few technical difficulties, but we're here and ready to get going. Today's session will be a little bit different from most of the past Lunch and Learns. I'm here, I guess, less to entertain or impart native plant knowledge, and more to ask a favor. And as you can see by the head, it's time to free the Ocklawaha River. I am the chair. Eugene Kelly is my name. I'm the chair of the Native Plant Society's Policy and Legislation Committee. We're going to be issuing an action alert very soon. There will be a 30-day window for our members and other members of the public to respond. And we really see this as the make or break time to finally see the Ocklawaha River restored. And that's because the St. Johns River Water Management District is going to be launching a public survey. They will be coordinating it. It will actually be designed by and for the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, which would have the primary responsibility for implementing any such restoration of the Ocklawaha River. I also like when I'm asking people to participate in advocacy actions for the Native Plant Society. I really like to reiterate what our mission is, because we do try to always relate our requests for your time and your action to our mission. And our mission, very succinctly stated, is to promote the preservation, conservation, and restoration of the native plants and native plant communities of Florida. So the Native Plant Society is one of about 60 members now of the Free the Ocklawaha River Coalition. I've got a partial listing here just to show what kind of company we're in. All these organizations are going to be asking their members, their followers, to participate in this survey. It's really an all hands on deck kind of moment for us to get as many members of the public to participate in this survey as possible during that 30-day window. We were hoping that today we'd be able to share with you a link and news that 30-day window has started, because today was supposed to be the first day. We just learned within the last 30 minutes or so that will not happen. DEP has not given the go-ahead to the Water Management District quite yet, but we expect that by next Tuesday, there will be a link and an officially approved survey so that we can go ahead and send out all that information to you in the way of an action alert. I'd like to start by giving just an overview of what we mean when we talk about restoration of the Ocklawaha River. And it's really much more than just a section of the Ocklawaha River. What you see here is an aerial view of the Rodman Reservoir. That's that big body of water. And you see pictured here at the east end of the reservoir, a dam and spillway system. In this corner here, that is the canal and Buckman lock system that allows boat traffic to move from the reservoir to the St. Johns River, which is just out of your view on this map. It's just a short distance to the east there. And you can probably make out the historic channel of the Ocklawaha River. So the actual restoration plan calls for breaching the dam, essentially allowing the reservoir to drain, and in the process restore about 15,000 acres of floodplain forests that were either completely drowned under that reservoir or that have been severely stressed by the increased water levels. This summarizes what the consensus plan for Ocklawaha River restoration is. And this is actually a long-standing plan. It's referred to as partial restoration. That is the preferred alternative, supported by multiple scientific assessments, recommendations from a number of agencies, including St. Johns River Water Management District, Florida Department of Environmental Protection, U.S. Forest Service, which owns the vast majority of the land that was flooded when that dam was constructed in 1968. There have been 2 environmental impact statements that supported restoration, and a lot of conservation organizations like ours and many of those others that you saw listed as members of the coalition were all in support of this restoration. Restoration, again, it would restore the natural river channel by draining the reservoir. In the process, restore the natural river flows and levels to the system. It was restore all those acres of floodplain forest to the pre-dam conditions. And there has been some recreational development here. That's really the main reason that restoration hasn't already taken place. The vested interests that wanted to see the reservoir preserved to support recreational use, primarily bass fishermen. There is a plan for the Cross Florida Greenway, of which this is part. And it states, the governor and cabinet have established a policy that the Ocklawaha River should be partially restored, with FDEP as the lead agency. However, the legislature has not appropriated funds for this purpose. If funds are made available and permits are issued, it's the intent of FDEP to undertake this restoration. So just a little bit of history, and you can get a lot more from other sources of information, including the most recent edition of our Sable Miner newsletter. But let me go to the next slide here. There's really a lot of reasons to pursue this restoration and very few not to. And I'm going to provide a very abbreviated list because, believe me, there's more to it than this. But this list of pros and cons, and this is taken from that Sable Miner newsletter article that was just published. 7,500 acres of floodplain forest were drowned under that reservoir. Another 8,000 acres estimated were stressed as a result of the change in water levels. Up to 20 springs and spring-run streams were drowned under that reservoir. Restoration would result in an additional 150 million gallons or more of additional freshwater discharge every day to the St. Johns River. The Ocklawaha River is the main tributary to the lower reaches of the St. Johns River. There's about 100 miles of St. Johns River from the confluence with the Ocklawaha to the point where the St. Johns discharges into the Atlantic Ocean. And most of that is estuary. So there's a lot of benefit to providing 150 million gallons of additional freshwater flow to that estuarine system. Part of that is it would help impede saltwater intrusion up the river and into the groundwater system as well. Removing the dam, breaching the dam would allow manatees to once again move up and down the Ocklawaha as they did historically. Silver Springs, the Silver River system, which is the main tributary to the Ocklawaha. And you'll see that in some maps that I'll show you in a few moments. That would be one of the primary warm water refugia for manatees within this river system. It was historically, and it would be again with restoration. There are a lot of fish species especially anadromous species, those that go from the ocean upstream in rivers to spawn, as it's a seasonal migration essential to their ability to reproduce. Those include striped bass, which is a major sport fish, American sturgeon, federally listed species, federally endangered, white and channel catfish, American shad, mullet. The natural movements of all those fish species would be restored. Water quality would be enhanced. The growth of invasive aquatic vegetation and the need for repetitive herbicide treatments on the reservoir would be greatly reduced, nearly negated. Landscape connectivity via what we call the O2O, or the Ocala to Osceola Wildlife Corridor, that would be enhanced. And I'm going to show you some maps and provide some additional discussion on that, because it's really relevant to us as supporters of native plant community conservation. Jump down, the expenditure of an estimated $14 million to repair the dam, which it has already exceeded its design lifespan, and it's in danger of, well, collapse. There's a lot of concern about that. And nearly $400,000 per year estimated to maintain and operate that dam. Those are costs that would be avoided if we simply restored the river system. I wanted to also include the cons. I've highlighted those in red here. The first is that an artificial lake that has experienced progressive declines in water quality and fisheries value over the last 53 years since that dam was constructed, that would be lost. Ah, shucks. The economic value of recreational usage would also, it could be argued it would be lost, but the plans for restoration call for additional recreational development, recognizing how important this reservoir and the recreational usage that it's drawn to the area, how important that has been to especially Putnam County, but the communities around the reservoir, which has been identified as an economically depressed area. So to really make restoration work, we have to account for the impacts that it would have on those local communities. And restoration, there's a lot of information to back this up. Restoration would actually result in increased usage when people go to see manatees at the Silver River, and some of those additional springs that would be restored. During the periodic drawdowns of the reservoir, and it does have to experience regular drawdowns in order to try to keep the system alive and functioning. When those drawdowns occur, there's been observations that recreational use, especially by paddlers, increases substantially by as much as 80%. A lot of those paddlers want to see the historic river channel, and they want to see those springs that have been drowned while the reservoir is full, and paddle up those historic spring runs. So the bottom line there is, with restoration, the economic impact of recreational usage would actually increase to the benefit of those nearby communities. Here's a map I created myself that gives another perspective on restoration. You see here in the middle, the Rodman Reservoir, the canal and Buckman Lock, where it meets with the St. Johns River, the historic channel below the Kirkpatrick Dam. You also see here that there are a lot of very significant public lands here, conservation areas like the Ocala National Forest, which borders the reservoir and the river on its south side. Immediately to the north is the Etaniah Creek Florida Forever project. Large portions of that are already protected as part of the Etaniah State Forest. But this map also identifies those areas, lands that are already in conservation status in public ownership are identified in cross-hatching, and stippling identifies the areas that are approved Florida Forever projects. So part of the story here really is that Ocala to Osceola wildlife corridor. All this green that you see is part of what's now being called the Florida Wildlife Corridor. The Florida legislature in the last session approved Florida Wildlife Corridor project to the tune of $300 million to protect lands that are slated for protection as part of that corridor. So again, everything you see here in green is part of that corridor. You can see large parts are protected. There are gaps. And when I pull back and show you this from a larger scale, you'll see that this corridor connection is perhaps the most important, the most viable opportunity we have to maintain really functional connectivity north to south through the northern half of the Florida Peninsula. So here's that view. I've pulled back and you see the Rodman Reservoir. Below it, the Ocala National Forest. To the north, you see Osceola National Forest, and how this network of lands, those in green are already in public ownership. Those in yellow are the approved Florida Forever project areas. And you can see that it's a long, continuous corridor that connects those two national forests. Would certainly be important to accommodate black bear movement, potentially Florida panther movement in the future. I do want to focus today on the benefits to native plants. So here we are again, looking at Ocala National Forest. That's that area in red. What I've done is I've distinguished areas within this same land area that are either scrub habitat, scrubby flatwoods, sandhill, or mesic flatwoods. The area in light green is that Florida Wildlife Corridor. You can see here that Ocala is a major scrub area, thousands and thousands of acres of sand pine scrub. We know that scrub harbors a lot of imperiled plant and animal species. I'm going to mention a few of those that are really relevant to this area, but thinking in terms of connectivity through that Florida Wildlife Corridor. You can see that that reservoir actually serves as a barrier right at the southern end of the O to O. We have thousands of acres of reservoir that are going to impede wildlife movement and plant movement via that corridor. So one major rationale for restoration above and beyond the benefits to the actual river systems and water resources is the manner in which it would enhance connectivity through the length of that O to O corridor. A term I might share with you is permeability. When we speak about wildlife corridors and whether they're good functional corridors or not, a lot of that comes down to this concept of permeability. How well can they accommodate movement? How permeable are they to movement by wildlife and plant life? Our position is that a restored river system, where much of that blue that you see is now open water in the reservoir, much of that, an estimated 7,500 acres of it, would be restored to the historical floodplain forest that was there, which would be more permeable, more accommodating to movement by wildlife and plants than that expanse of open water. So the reason I distinguished some of those particular communities was they have been identified by the Florida Natural Areas Inventory as rare or imperiled communities that are underrepresented in public ownership. And in part, that's due to the fact they also harbor a lot of imperiled species. I'm focusing now in this slide on species that are present within the scrub and other xeric habitats within this area, within the Ocala National Forest, to some extent in areas to the north side of Rodman Reservoir. They include scrub buckwheat. That is a species that is listed as threatened under the U.S. Endangered Species Act. Clasping Waria, that is listed as endangered under the U.S. Endangered Species Act. The other three species you see here, the pygmy pipes, pond spice, Florida spiny pod, those are listed by the state as either endangered in the case of the pygmy pipes and pond spice. Actually, I think I mislabeled one of these. The pygmy pipes, I believe, is listed as threatened by the state. Regardless, these are 5 plant species, all listed as imperiled, that occur within the xeric habitats, the scrub, sandhill, and pine flatwoods, mesic flatwoods of this region of the state. And I think this helps tell some of the story too. In the case of Waria and plexifolia, clasping Waria, federally listed as endangered. I've shown the range map here that I took from the Institute for Systematic Botany website. And if you're familiar with the shape of those counties, Marion County and that section of the Ocala National Forest that's south of the reservoir is the northern limit of the range for clasping Waria. That's the case for some of these additional species as well. And it's important to consider, especially with climate change, that the ability of species to move, migrate north or south, in this case north, in response to a changing climate, could be really critical to whether there is a future for these species. So in the case of clasping Waria, it doesn't occur on the north side of the reservoir anywhere, or at least it hasn't been documented there. But improving permeability, improving connectivity northward towards all those additional public lands, including some that should provide suitable habitat for a species like Waria, it'll be greatly enhanced. There are a couple other species that favor spring run streams. And I did mention that there are springs and spring runs that have been drowned, inundated completely by creation of that reservoir, by the dam. These include star anise, listed by the state as endangered, and Hartridia, listed by the state as threatened. I've shown the range maps here, and somewhat similar to the clasping Waria, the northern limit of the range for star anise is Marion County. So again, restoration of the Ocklawaha would restore those historic stream runs, ideally accommodate reestablished populations of these 2 species, and also potentially accommodate migration to the north. There are a number of other plant species that I identified, imperiled species that occur in other kinds of habitats, through this region. I use a tool that the Florida Natural Areas Inventory makes available on their website, the Biodiversity Index, I believe it's called, and it allows you to do a search for species within a specified geographic area, species that are tracked by the Natural Areas Inventory based on imperilment. So what is it we're asking you to do today? Well, we want you to help us make sure that restoration finally happens. It's been 53 years since that dam was built, creating this reservoir as part of the Cross-Florida Barge Canal system. It's one of the only components of that Cross-Florida Barge Canal that was actually built before the whole project was halted, because it was going to result in such incredible environmental impacts. The Florida Defenders of the Environment is an organization that was actually created to kill that project. Again, before it was killed, that dam was constructed 53 years ago. The components that were not altered to accommodate the barge canal, they were placed in public ownership, and now we call it the Cross-Florida Greenway. Restoring the Ocklawaha River would in effect help restore a big segment of that Cross-Florida Greenway and the environmental and recreational benefits that it provides. So we're asking you to participate in this survey that's going to go live, hopefully next Tuesday, from what we just heard earlier today. There will be a link that we will provide when this survey goes live, a link to the St. Johns River Water Management District website, where they will be conducting this survey. Essentially, if you participate, you'll be asked to answer 4 basic questions. And those are questions that get at, what is your position on restoration? Do you support it or do you oppose it? There's also going to be a series of demographic questions to get a handle on whether people actually recreate there, and if so, how often. But you're not precluded from participating in the survey, even if you've never had the opportunity to visit the Ocklawaha. And after it's restored, there will be a lot more reasons to visit. That survey is going to be live for 30 days. Then they're going to take it down. So that's our window of opportunity to really have some influence on whether restoration will finally happen. It's come to a head in large part because I mentioned it only briefly. That dam has reached the end of its design lifespan. It's actually exceeded it. So the time has come to either restore that dam. It's estimated that would cost, and this was an estimate that's about 20 years old now, $14 million to restore. And I also had mentioned a bit earlier, $400,000 a year to maintain. We either invest in that or we breach the dam to complete restoration. And when we send out our action alert, it will include a lot of information. It'll include some talking points to help you answer all of these different survey questions. The first of which, what would you like to see happen with the Rodman Reservoir and Kirkpatrick Dam moving forward? This is one of the most straightforward to answer. Simply restoration of the Ocklawaha River by breaching the Rodman/Kirkpatrick Dam. Just one little piece of history. Senator Kirkpatrick was a member of the Florida legislature back in the late 80s, early 90s. And he was a major advocate for preserving the Rodman Reservoir. And so while conservation organizations like ours were fighting for restoration, promoting restoration, and I recall writing letters way back in the day in support of restoration, Senator Kirkpatrick succeeded in fighting back the push for restoration. And in his honor, the legislature renamed the dam in his honor. So it came from being called the Rodman Dam to the Kirkpatrick Dam. Anyway, question number one, very straightforward. What we want is restoration of a free-flowing Ocklawaha River. Second question that the survey is supposed to ask, we won't know for certain until we see it, but what is the most important piece of information that supports your position? Why do you think restoration is so important? I've provided a list of 10 points here, and this will be part of the information that we provide to you in the action alert. There will also be some additional arguments, bits of information in support of restoration. And you can pick and choose the ones that resonate the most for you. We will highlight in all our suggestions the answers that really reflect and advance our mission to preserve native plants and native plant communities. But we don't discount the importance of all these other important environmental benefits. Point down at the bottom here, I'd mentioned the dam is at the end of its design lifespan. There's now been projections of what might happen if that dam were to fail. And downstream, where the Ocklawaha River meets the St. Johns, is the community of, just drew a blank, Welaka, excuse me. There it is. If that dam were to fail, it's estimated there'd be $57 million in potential property damages to downstream property, especially to the community of Welaka. They're right in the crosshairs. The third question, what would be your biggest concern if your desired outcome is not achieved? This is kind of the flip side of the previous question about why you think it's so important. The flip side would be, if you think it's important to restore those 15,000 acres of stressed and drowned floodplain forest, then if restoration didn't happen, then we would not see those floodplain forests restored. But again, we will provide lots of food for thought, lots of potential arguments for you to use when you answer this third question. Fourth question is another one that's really easy to answer. Is there any scenario short of fully achieving your desired outcome, restoration of the Ocklawaha River, that you could support? And the simple answer is no. This is already, as I explained at the beginning of the presentation, this is partial restoration. We're not talking about filling in the canal and completely removing the dam. We're talking about breaching the dam. Makes it a lot less expensive, and it's a very straightforward process. It does achieve nearly all the benefits of complete restoration. But no, your answer should be there is no other alternative to restoration that you would support. Breaching the dam is 50 years plus overdue, and on the basis of all the environmental harms that resulted from the dam construction, the benefits that would be realized with restoration, improvements to water quality, benefits to wildlife and native plants. There's really no alternative other than restoration. So please, if you're a member of the Florida Native Plant Society, watch your inbox for an action alert that should be coming soon. As soon as we get the final word from the Water Management District and a link to that survey, we will send out that action alert. We have over 5,000 members now, and I know the vast majority receive our alerts. If you don't, it's a simple matter to ask that we add your name to the list of people who receive the alerts. So I've included a web address there, email address, info@fnps.org. Just email to that address and ask that your name be added to the Urgent Action Alert Network. If you're not a member, certainly you can join and get yourself on the alert list. But if you're tuning in, you're not a member, you can still participate. As I said, all those organizations that are members of the coalition, we're all in this. And you can get information through them, but the most direct alternative to the Florida Native Plant Society Action Alert would be to navigate to the FORCE website. That's FORCE, the acronym for Free the Ocklawaha River Coalition for Everyone. That's at freetheocklawaha.com. They will have a landing page there, as they call it, that will provide nearly all the information we'll provide. We'll have additional plant information that might be lacking from that site, but everything else will be included on their site. Links to documents and studies that support restoration, and of course, a link to the Water Management District's survey. When we provide those talking points to you, it might look pretty lengthy. It's actually distilled down. If you were to go and review all the information that's available, there have been economic analyses conducted, all kinds of studies about the water resource impacts, hundreds and thousands of pages of scientific documents that really support restoration as the only real alternative for the Ocklawaha River system here. So I hope that all of you that have tuned in will participate in the survey. We really do believe that it will come down. Certainly your answers will be important, but to a large extent, this is an issue that will go to the Florida legislature. The results of this survey will go to the legislature, and whether or not we see them pass a bill next year to support restoration rather than repair or replacement of the dam will really depend on how they gauge the public's position on this. There is another side. There are organizations that support preserving the Rodman Reservoir. We believe that their rationale is short-sighted and doesn't take into consideration all the arguments, all the pros in support of restoration. But we really want our side of the debate to be the one that overwhelms, if you will, the legislature, the Water Management District, Florida Department of Environmental Protection with our responses. So with all that said, I'm prepared to answer questions any of you might have. I'm hoping Valerie's technical difficulties are over and she'll be able to choreograph some question and answer for us.
Yes, I think I'm okay now.
All right.
I do think I have to turn my mic up though. I was filming and so it was low. Okay, so
Should I stop sharing screen or?
You can. People will see us larger if you stop sharing screen, in case that's helpful.
Okay.
So just to orient people, what they're going to get is you're going to get a link, right, a, to a website, an agency website. So this is being carried out by the responsible agency, St. Johns River Water Management District, right?
Yes, they're conducting it on behalf of the Department of Environmental Protection, which would be the agency responsible for actually following through with restoration.
So people will see a bunch of text boxes. They'll be on the St. Johns River Water Management District website, and they can have our action alert open. They can have the Free the Ocklawaha website open, and then they can fill in these responses at their leisure. It shouldn't take, I mean, what do you say, maybe 15 minutes or so, 20 minutes?
We're doing what we can to make it a streamlined, pretty straightforward process. It could be a matter of cut and paste from some of the talking points, although we kind of prefer when people try to put those responses into their own words.
Some other questions are, people have asked me, should they be contacting their congressman? Should they be contacting, other legislators for this particular action?
Not yet. Hopefully that time will come. This is really the big essential push, though, is this survey. We think it's going to set the stage for what kind of action the Florida legislature will take. There really isn't a role in this for your congressperson. This comes down to the Florida legislature, your representative and senator in the Florida legislature. The coalition has members, representatives that have been meeting with a number of state legislators, people from the relevant agencies, trying to set the stage for this, looking for legislators that would be amenable to sponsoring a bill in favor of restoration. So when the time comes, when the legislative session starts in about 4 months from now, hopefully there will be such a bill. And at that point, we will be reaching out again, asking our members to contact their representative and senator and ask them to support the bill that favors restoration.
And a couple of questions about the survey. Can you complete the survey more than once?
Now, that was a question that I had for the rest of the coalition members. And they didn't really have an answer. I don't know that there would be anything that would preclude a person from going in once a day and answering that. It may not be the most ethical thing to do. We hear a lot now about rigged elections. This if people just keep responding, it really could kind of corrupt the process. And one of the reasons I raise that question is our concern. We think there's going to be there's a lot more support across the state for restoration than there is for preserving the reservoir. And if the other side in this debate starts answering that survey, responding to that survey multiple times, we've already decided we want to get our hands on all the raw data, the survey results, so that we can ascertain whether something like that has happened. We're not looking to game the system here. We're not looking to win somehow by cheating. In effect, this is a poll. How many citizens speak in support of restoration versus how many in support of preserving the Rodman Reservoir? And we want to approach it honestly, and we think that the mountain of science and economic information that backs up our position, that and enough of us responding to the survey should really be all it takes to push us over the hump and finally, after 53 years, see restoration move forward.
Let's see. So anyone in the world can take this survey. It's not just limited to people who use the Ocklawaha or live nearby.
Correct. And in fact, some of us are reaching out across the country. There are a lot of rivers in this country that have been dammed or otherwise altered that would benefit from restorative actions. We're going to reach out to some of those, and we'll certainly be willing to reach out and help those in other states when they're trying to see some of their rivers restored. But that list of members of the Free the Ocklawaha Coalition, the first one listed was American Rivers. That is a national organization. And a couple other members of the coalition are national organizations. So this has national import. It benefits a lot of different imperiled species. Sometimes I don't really like to use that phrase "no brainer," but if you look at the list of pros and cons, the cons don't hold up. It's a very short list and they don't hold up, and they're easily countered. And the benefits are just so numerous. And we really just need people of goodwill and conscience who appreciate the environmental import of projects like this to step forward and participate in the survey.
Jenny asks, why would the canal not be filled in?
Well, in part, that increases the cost. There have been cost estimates. I shared the ones, $14 million to repair the dam, $400,000 a year to maintain and operate it. The cost for restoration is estimated at nearly 50 million. And you could say that's a much bigger number, but economic analyses have shown that the impact on recreational usage would more than compensate. And the net result of restoration would actually be, far exceed that. Did I answer that question? Or
we'll see if they chime back in. Like Jenny chimes back in. Melissa Lammers, Pawpaw chapter, says she's on the website now, the Free the Ocklawaha Coalition website. She says your map was better, and it might be useful to get more people to take the survey, which your map clearly showed the historic flow of the river. Would love to have that as a part of an action alert. I imagine it would be. You worked pretty hard on that map.
Yes, a map is worth 1,000 words, so I appreciate that comment.
Diana asks, how much will restoration cost? Any estimates, and from whom?
Yes, well, as I said, I think it's $47 million is the estimate. And, one of the things I was really interested in doing was comparing and contrasting this with another major river restoration project, that being the Kissimmee, which is nearly completed. I shared some of that information in the Sable Minor article, but the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers just this year released a fact sheet where they estimate that when it's all said and done, and it's nearly all said and done, Kissimmee River restoration will have cost $1 billion. A big part of that is they had to buy 100,000 acres from ranchers who owned land, grazing land, along what had been the Kissimmee River floodplain. They had to buy all that land back in order to be able to complete that restoration. In the case of restoring the Ocklawaha, virtually all of that land is already in public ownership. When and we've seen this during those regular drawdowns that I mentioned, when they draw the water down and expose a lot of that river bottom to try to consolidate bottom sediments, oxidize some of the nutrients that have degraded the lake system, the reservoir system. Before they close that dam and refill the reservoir, you can see red maples and all kinds of other species already starting to sprout on the exposed bottom. So we won't say that it'll just be a simple matter of draining the reservoir and then letting the natural system regenerate itself, but to a large degree that will happen. We anticipate there would be some invasive species that would become established there, and a need to control those, manage those, maybe do some plantings of native species. But by and large, this kind of project, compared to something like the Kissimmee River, this is shovel ready, and this is bargain basement restoration for such a huge land area, such a big system, and all the benefits that go with it. $50 million is a real bargain.
Yeah, and in that same vein, Melanie would like to know if the Free the Ocklawaha Coalition explains the process and the parts of partial restoration so that you can understand it better.
Yes, they do provide a good explanation of that. And maybe that question highlights the need for me to include some better explanation of that in the action alert that we do send out.
Yeah.
Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, if I were, responding to this survey now, I would want to be a bit more knowledgeable about exactly what that looks like, what parts are going to flood, how long is it going to take, that kind of thing. So yeah, that would be good. I can answer Diana's question. She asks, do any of these constituent organizations plan to do their own action alerts and background info specific to the organizations? And I'm on those communications calls with the rest of the coalition, and every active organization that is on those calls is planning their own. They are planning their own action alerts. Save the Manatee Club, Defenders of the Environment, Defenders of Wildlife, St. John's River Keeper. Yeah.
Sierra Club. It's a long list. We're in very good company.
Yeah. Are there any age restrictions for the survey?
No age, no. Like I said, you don't even have to be a Florida resident.
I don't think those demographic questions even include age at the beginning.
What I heard yesterday.
Right. Bill Klein says, I want to share your map and discussion on Facebook, so I'll make sure to include that in the action alert that I post on the FNPS action alerts page. I'll probably also post that on the main FNPS page, so it'll be easy to share.
And the maps, I would just like to share, I think I overlooked this, but a lot of the data that I used, the majority of it came from the Florida Natural Areas Inventory. They produce and maintain that data to keep it up to date. It can be downloaded from their website. It's a real godsend to have an organization like the Florida Natural Areas Inventory out there. Provides all this data so that we can make these maps and do all these kinds of analyses. So, and definitely a nod out to Florida Natural Areas Inventory.
Bill also asks, will restoring the Ocklawaha River also help restore Silver Springs? I remember how beautiful Silver Springs was in the 50s.
Well, to a degree, some of the stressed floodplain forest probably extends as far upriver as Silver Springs. There is some expectation, I think, that the flow out of Silver Springs might change, might increase a little because of some of the backwater effect from draining the reservoir. But by and large, the main benefit to Silver Springs might be the that you'll see manatees there again. I believe there are some small number of manatees that make their way into the Ocklawaha River system. It's not impossible to get through that lock system, but I think it's a rarity. But one of the largest artesian springs in the world, it sure looks like it would be a major refugium, warm water habitat during the winter for an imperiled species like the manatee. So that's one of the, and those fish, we mentioned a number of fish species, they would again be able to move up the river system. So if you go to Silver Springs and take a ride in their glass bottom boat, there might be a lot more things of interest to see in terms of fish and manatees.
Ginny would like clarification. So the canal would be retained for recreational purposes and to reduce the restoration expenses.
Well, yes. And to expand a little bit on that, there is a park now that is located around the area of the lock. And I mentioned that restoration would entail some recreational development. And so part of that would be enhanced facilities. We're even talking about tournament facilities for bass fishermen, because that has been a big part of why people want to retain the reservoir. There's been regular bass tournaments held there. So that lower part of the canal around the locks would provide access to the St. Johns River through those recreational facilities. And one thing worth mentioning while I bring it up is those bass tournaments. It's observed now that a lot of the participants in those tournaments, the first thing they do is they go down to the lock, exit Rodman, and go into the St. Johns River to catch their bass. And in the latest ratings of water bodies, which are the best for bass fishing, the St. Johns River ranks considerably higher than the Rodman Reservoir. So we're confident even the bass fishermen will ultimately be pleased with the results of restoration.
Carol asks if this will help increase the amount of seagrass available for, I'm assuming, manatee consumption.
Especially, we especially expect to see that in the lower St. Johns. I mentioned it's 100 miles of St. Johns River, the lower St. Johns, that extends from the confluence with the Ocklawaha to the mouth of the Atlantic, mouth of the St. Johns at the Atlantic. And there's been a lot of seagrass lost in that system. And the additional freshwater flow, the improvements to water quality that we would see in the lower St. Johns, we expect that we could see a lot of recovery of those lost seagrass beds.
Thank you, Gene. Jan from Pinellas asks, how much will the existing footprint of the reservoir shrink if the dam is removed?
Well, I think that's where the estimated 7,500 acres of restored floodplain forest comes from. About 7,500 acres of what is now open water reservoir would become floodplain forest.
Yeah.
But see, the other thing, I compared and contrast restoration of the Ocklawaha with the Kissimmee. They had to recreate river channel in a lot of areas to reconnect old river channel and oxbows. Here, you see it when they do those drawdowns. The river channel is there. So again, it's really a pretty straightforward kind of restoration process, shovel ready. And there's federal money right now that was approved as part of the infrastructure bill that Congress passed that goes towards removing dams to restore rivers. So I mean, this is just a confluence of circumstances that clearly now is the time for restoration of the Ocklawaha.
Yes. Thank you, Gene. And so just to plug, I made some t-shirts at the request of the coalition. I made them just above cost, so they're relatively cheap on our store. So if if you want to show your support out in public or you're talking about it, I'm going to put the links in the chat. We have a double-sided one that's more expensive. It's just $2 above our above our margin. And then there's a single-sided, so that's much cheaper. It's like 14 bucks. And we will let you know if you don't see the notification and you need it. You can message our Facebook page. You can email me, communications@fnps.org. If you have any questions, I can get you in contact with Gene. And we're really hoping that they release it on Tuesday, like they say they're going to.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for tuning in, all of you who did. And I appreciate your time and attention. And I really hope you'll watch your inbox for our action alert and participate in the survey and ask your friends and neighbors to do the same.
Yes, evangelize this river restoration thing. And next week I did film yesterday for a lunch and learn yesterday. Yeah, for next week's lunch and learn. So that's going to be Pam Adams, our 2021 Landscape Award of Merit for Residential Landscapes. So she's an award winner. And so I filmed her in her yard. So I'll edit that this week and we'll have one next week. So keep an eye on for the Monday notification email for that. All right. Everybody have an awesome weekend. Thank you for caring about this really important issue. And have a great weekend.